George Herbert Mead and Herbert Blumer, The Self You Never Built Alone.
Here is a claim that sounds almost too simple until you actually sit with it. You do not walk into this world already knowing who you are. You become a self only by first learning how to see yourself through other people's eyes.
And the man who argued that never lived to publish the book everyone now credits him for. I had to write it for him, after he was gone, using nothing but student notes.
That is Herbert Blumer, and you will hear directly from him shortly, because without him almost nobody would know my name today. I am George Herbert Mead, a philosopher and social psychologist who taught for decades at the University of Chicago, and I want to start with the actual argument, because it explains something about you that you have probably never had language for.
Go ahead. Start with the self.
Most people assume the self is simply there from birth, a fixed core personality waiting to unfold. I argued the self is social through and through, built entirely out of interaction with other people, and it never fully stops being built. A newborn has no sense of self as a distinct object at all. That sense only emerges gradually as a child learns to take the role of another person, to imagine how a parent, a sibling, a playmate sees them, and then to see themselves through that borrowed vantage point. I called this role-taking, and I considered it the actual engine that builds a mind capable of self-reflection at all.
Which leads directly into one of his two most useful terms, the I and the me.
The me is the socialized self, the accumulated set of expectations, roles, and attitudes you have absorbed from the people and groups around you, essentially the self as seen from the outside, through the eyes of others. The I is the spontaneous, responding part of you, the part that reacts, improvises, and sometimes surprises even yourself in the moment. Every action a person takes is some blend of the two, the accumulated social me shaping expectations, and the improvising I actually responding to the specific situation in front of you.
And underneath both of those ideas sits something even more foundational, symbols and shared meaning.
Exactly, because none of this role-taking is possible without language and shared symbols. A word, a gesture, a raised eyebrow only means something because two people have learned to interpret it the same way. Human beings do not simply react to stimuli the way, say, a dog reacts to a raised hand. We interpret meaning, we imagine how our action will be read by the other person, and we adjust accordingly before we even act. That constant, split-second interpretive loop is what makes human social life fundamentally different from anything else in the animal world, in my account.
And that is precisely where I came in, because he never got to finish organizing any of this into a single, coherent framework himself.
Tell them honestly what happened, because it matters for understanding why your name sits right alongside mine in every textbook.
Mead died in 1931, and he had never published the systematic theoretical statement of his ideas that later made him famous. What existed instead was a scattered collection of lecture notes, taken down by his own students at the University of Chicago over many years. I was one of those students, and after his death I worked to compile, organize, and eventually publish those notes as Mind, Self, and Society, and it was my own writing afterward that gave the entire framework its lasting name, symbolic interactionism, a phrase Mead himself never actually used.
Which means credit here is genuinely shared, not simply borrowed.
I want to be direct about that, because it would be far too easy for me to sound like a mere mouthpiece repeating his ideas back to the world. I did not just transcribe him. I built the actual working method later generations of sociologists used to study everyday interaction empirically, three core premises that still anchor the whole field. First, people act toward things based on the meaning those things hold for them. Second, that meaning arises out of social interaction with other people, not from the object itself in isolation. Third, people actively interpret and modify that meaning through an ongoing process of thought as they encounter each new situation, rather than simply applying a fixed meaning automatically. Mead gave the philosophy. I gave the field a method for actually studying it.
And we should place this properly in its actual setting, because neither of us was working in isolation.
Both of us were part of what became known as the Chicago School of Sociology, a genuinely distinctive research tradition built around direct urban fieldwork. Sociologists and students walking the actual streets, tenements, dance halls, and immigrant neighborhoods of a rapidly growing industrial city, rather than theorizing purely from a library chair. Chicago in the early 20th century was exploding in population, absorbing waves of immigration and internal migration, and that specific churning urban laboratory shaped the entire intellectual style of the school, an insistence on going out and actually watching how meaning and identity got built and rebuilt in real, observable daily interaction.
Let us make the actual theory concrete, because role-taking can sound abstract until you notice it happening in your own day.
Think about how differently a single person carries themselves across one ordinary day. Talking to a parent, a certain posture returns almost automatically, old habits of deference or old jokes resurfacing without conscious thought. Talking to a boss, a more careful, measured version of the same person emerges, weighing words slightly before speaking. Talking to a close friend, the guard drops almost entirely, humor gets sharper, language gets looser. None of those are fake performances layered over one true self hiding underneath. In Mead's own framework, all three genuinely are you, each version built through the specific social relationship calling it into being in that moment.
Now, is this theory simply correct, or has later work complicated it the way every thinker in this series eventually gets complicated?
It has been complicated plenty, and it is worth being honest about that. Critics have argued symbolic interactionism, for all its insight into everyday meaning-making, has less to say about large-scale structural power, entrenched inequality, institutional racism, systems that shape people's lives in ways far beyond any single face-to-face interaction. Later thinkers, including several we have already covered in this series, argued you need a theory of large structural power sitting alongside this framework, not simply a theory of moment-to-moment meaning, to explain why some people's interpretations of a situation carry so much more institutional weight than others.
Fair criticism, and one I would not have resisted myself. I always considered this a theory of how meaning gets built moment to moment, not a complete theory of everything shaping a human life.
Which is exactly why this framework maps so cleanly onto something neither of us could have imagined, the modern social media profile.
Explain that connection, because it is a genuinely striking one.
A social media profile is essentially Mead's looking glass self, running on a live, hyperactive feedback loop. A person posts a photo, watches likes and comments accumulate in real time, and adjusts their next post based directly on that visible, quantified reaction, refining which version of themselves gets rewarded with attention and which gets ignored. Mead's original insight was that we build a self by imagining how others see us. Social media removes the imagining almost entirely, and replaces it with an actual running scoreboard of exactly how others are reacting, second by second.
And that connects directly to a very live, very current argument.
Extremely current. Ongoing debates about identity, performance, and authenticity online, whether a curated profile represents a person's real self or a manufactured, audience-optimized character, are essentially a modern rerun of the exact question Mead raised a century earlier. Is there ever a single true self hiding underneath the social performance, or is the performance, shaped by an audience's real-time reactions, simply what a self actually is? Mead's own answer, and mine, would be that the question itself may be slightly the wrong one. The self was always built through an audience's reactions. Social media has just made that audience larger, faster, and far more visible than a parent's raised eyebrow across a dinner table ever was.
So what is the honest, motivating reason to actually know both of our names?
Because together we explain something almost everyone senses, but rarely names precisely, that you are not one fixed person wearing different masks. You are genuinely, continuously built through every interaction you have, and noticing that clearly is the first step toward choosing, a little more deliberately, which version of yourself a given relationship or platform is actually shaping.
Which sets up a natural next step for this module, because we have spent this whole episode at the scale of a single self built through individual interaction.
Our next thinker takes that same basic insight, meaning is built, not simply given, and blows it up to the scale of an entire culture, an entire people's whole shared world of ritual, symbol, and belief.
Next time, Clifford Geertz, and a cockfight in Bali that somehow explains an entire society's sense of status and honor. See you then.